Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Motility's webinar on parts kits and parts invoicing. My name is Griffin Greer with the Professional Services Department. We're going to give a few more minutes here for everyone to join in, so feel free to just be patient for a moment. We'll probably start here about 5 after, so I'll talk to you here in just a moment. All right, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I think we've got everyone joining who's will be joining today. And again, we are covering parts invoicing and parts kits. So for those of you returning from yesterday's webinars, welcome back. Any newcomers, welcome to the series. I will allude a little bit back to our service training from yesterday for those of you who were on that session, because a lot of what you'll be seeing here is very similar. And like we had talked about, the system's pretty consistent in its invoice listing views. So what you're seeing today shouldn't be completely new. It should be fairly similar to what we saw yesterday. So let's go ahead and get started. We had already talked a little bit about the parts and service, the differences between opening one location to the next. If I need to generate service or parts tickets in location B, I would need to open up that location. Once you have created a parts ticket or a service invoice, there is no way to change the location on the ticket. So if I accidentally write up a parts quote for someone in B, of course I could still quote them, possibly even give them a customer copy, for estimate purposes. But for the ticket to truly close out to the other store, we would need to void that one, recreate it in the appropriate location. So just as a heads up there, just make sure if you do have multiple locations that you're opening the right one at the store that you're at respectively. So we're going to go ahead and open up location 1. And just as we had seen before, this invoicing listing should look fairly similar. If I click on the service invoice listing, just to kind of remind us what that looks like. Again, we've got the quote, open, closed, not cashed out down here at the bottom, closed, cashed out, and then voided, as well as a few other functionalities related to service. If I look at the parts invoicing screen, it's just about the same. We start with quotes or estimates or whatever we want to call our estimate status for parts. Typically, I usually see appointment as the service estimate status or quote status, and then on the part side, it's usually called an estimate. Again, that's either preference, whatever you would like them to be named. I would advise using that. Open invoices here, so tickets that are not quite yet an estimate. Now, it's a little bit different. Usually a service ticket, once it's turned from a quote into an open invoice, you start billing out things like time. You can start creating parts orders, things like that. On an open parts ticket, we're really just assuming that the parts are now being relieved, right? They're being taken from inventory. So we will show that within the ticket so you kind of get an idea of what I'm saying. But just good to know kind of that's, once it's an open ticket, now we can take deposits on it, relieve our inventory, you name it. We've got our closed, not cashed out, which again, I think I mentioned this yesterday, but I'm not a huge fan of the closed, not cashed out listing. Here's why. If someone marks something closed, cashed out, because let's say I showed up to purchase some parts, we went to ring my card and my card got declined, well, I'll be back later in the day to finalize my payment. So, you guys hang on to the parts, but let me go ahead and leave. Well, you'll go ahead and put the ticket maybe in a closed and not cashed out status so that nothing changes on it from my going to go get my other payment type and then returning. The problem with closed, not cashed out is folks can forget about that. What if I never come back? And now I've got a ticket over here that has relieved parts that have been pulled from inventory when no one collected payment on it. But it looks like it's been done. So, there's just a lot of room for error if you're frequently closing and not cashing out things. So I almost even recommend in that same scenario, just leave the ticket open, and then if you're doing a monthly invoice sweep and voiding out or reviewing anything older than 30 days, you'll capture that there. Or if your team just knows to check this closed, not cashed out daily and making sure that, oh, why do we have this Lavoris ticket from back in 2017? Did we never actually finalize this? Did he never collect his parts? It's hard to know, especially if something sits here for a long time. So, and we'll go through what that means to close, not cash out. But ultimately, you want every invoice to land here, the closed, cashed out screen. That's where you're going to have all of the revenue and costs generated for accounting. We're going to be pulling that part out of the inventory GLs, and then whatever cash, card, or check payments we've received will go into our clearing accounts. Then, of course, we have our void. Again, we don't delete anything in the system, so if there ever was a reference to it at some point, you could always find it, whether it was voided or possibly cashed out years ago. You also have that save layout button, so just like before on the service side, if you want to click and drag, move around your status headers here, or perhaps there's a field here missing that I need. So I go to Tools, Parts Tools, Set Up Invoice Columns, just like the others. I can customize this screen as well. So let me see the cash out date. Maybe customer PO number we use quite a bit. So now I have both of those items in here. Again, just remember to hit Save Layout if you do want to keep your changes. And this is a per user setup. So if you make your screen all nice, it's not going to mess up anybody else's. So you do want to make sure that as a team, you get together and decide, here are all the fields that we would like to use together. So just like before, you should be familiar with the, the navigation of this module. Again, I'm always going to advise using our filters for finding something. You know, if I have a customer with the last name Anderson, it's very easy for me to just, if I could spell it correctly, just type that in. You know, or like we've talked about, you know, the invoice number is probably the most preferential, easiest way to find something in this system. So there's our invoice number there on the left, 124414. Down here at the bottom left, you have a screen number search. Well, if you just type that invoice number in, 124411, it'll take you right to it. So probably the fastest piece of information that will help you navigate in the system is always the document ID. And that's true for whether it's a deal, service ticket, a parts ticket, a PO. Just keep that in mind. Sometimes that'll be the fastest way to find things. So let's talk about creating a new parts invoice. There's actually 3 different ticket types. So I'm going to actually open up all 3, and I'd like to make it very simple as to the differences to each. So there's our first one. This is our new quote. Here's our second one. This is our new invoice. Now this is kind of funny what I'm doing here, but I promise there's a purpose. Here's the third one, point of sale ticket. So each of these documents are slightly different, but I'm just trying to show a side-by-side that they really are the same. There's only minor differences between them. So whichever of the 3 that you open, I want you to make sure you understand when you would use one over the other, and if you even need to use 1 or 2 of them in reality when you could just use 1. So with all 3 of these document types up, the only difference that visually that you can see is the status, right? My new quote started in an estimate status as opposed to my point of sale and new invoices that opened up with open invoice. If I flip my estimate status to open invoice, I have functionally copied, it's the exact same thing. Okay, so the differences between new quote and new invoice is simply the status that it starts in. Pretty simple. The difference between a new invoice and a point of sale ticket, slightly different, but definitely something to worth noting. If I put a part onto this ticket, part number 123, this flexible hose, on a new invoice, of course, I chose a prompt for price and cost part. Let me turn that off for the moment. We'll get into that as we train on the master inventory, which is the screen you see in front of you. That will be this afternoon at 1 p.m. But in the case of adding that part, if you notice, we have a column for sold and a column for relieved. Meaning, sold is an allocation, right? So if a customer comes in or calls on the phone and says, hey, I want to buy part number 123, I need 3 of them. So I can allocate 3, and I'll see that allocation show up down here at the bottom, right? I have 1,000 in stock. 999 or 97 in stock and 8 allocated to invoices. So technically what I have available is 989. Well, that 3 is contributing to that total allocation right now. If I zero this out, my total allocated goes down to 5. So allocation meaning that when we do pull this from inventory, it's going to go down by 3. So we're holding 3 for this customer. When I relieve 3, I am telling the system that I have physically handed the customer these parts, or in the case of a technician on a service ticket, I have gone out and handed him those parts in that bay. Only when you relieve a part does the total on hand truly decrease, because we've now said that those items truly have left inventory. So even though this ticket hasn't been cashed out, now I've pulled 3 out. So usually you don't have a discrepancy between these 2 fields, but that does tell you that, oh, customer called in and he's going to arrive in about 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and prep these 3 items so that when he arrives, we can cash him out and obviously relieve his tickets or parts as part of that process. If I do that same technique on the point of sale ticket, you'll notice that the item auto relieves. So just like any point of sale system, if you've got a point of sale scanner and you scan the barcode of that part, you can scan it and it will auto relieve for you. So you don't have to come over here, type a 1, add the next part, add a 1. It'll auto relieve to the quantity that you're marking as sold. Pretty handy. So really the big question is when would you use one invoice type over the other? The point of sale ticket is obviously dedicated to be a over-the-counter sale item, so your team can just scan parts and collect payment fairly easily without having to use their keyboard and mouse, versus the first 2 items, which don't auto-relieve for you and require you to hand change those fields once you do pull the items from inventory. So you're now familiar with the 3 differences, or the 2 differences between these 3 documents. One starts in a different status. The other auto relieves parts, and then the new invoice is kind of in between. So there will be instances where one is more valuable than the next to use. Obviously, that's just something that you'll find as you work through this system, a good workflow process. So I still recommend creating estimates for everything, just because it's much easier. If I just open a new invoice for someone, and even if it's a $0 ticket and we forget about it, well, look, then on my open invoice list is just long. And now I have 2017 items in here. I have items from 2014 in here. There's no value to me holding all these parts invoices open, because if I pull an open parts ticket report, well, now the report is going to show 1,000 invoices, and that's a little bit misconstrued as to what our actual parts department is working. So for me to void all of these tickets, there really is no way to do so. I would have to go into each invoice one at a time, mark it voided, and type V for void. I'm just going to put test here, or here we go, old invoice cleanup. Great, I've cleaned up one of what seems to be 1,000 tickets, and that's kind of a pain to work through. And obviously this has gone on for some time, but if no one upkeeps this, the dealership will end up just as messy with their invoice counts. As opposed to if I do the same on a quote, right? So I create a new quote, put in my customer information. So Mr. Greer called. I confirm his address. Maybe it's not in here, but then he specifies that, oh no, I used to live on 528 North Lake. I just moved. So great, I'll grab that entity record, click add modify entity, and then update this to 123 Main Street, his current address. Easy enough. So now, having updated that information and putting in my parts estimate, right? Griffin called, he wants 3 flexible hoses, and he says he'll be here in an hour. So great, I'll go ahead and minimize this. You'll see it here in the quote listing, and I'll go about my day. When Mr. Greer arrives, it'll be very easy to find that ticket. What if he doesn't show up? And then monthly, we do invoice cleanups. Well, instead of having to click on this and void it, there's a tool called Void Appointments and Estimates. And this works both for the parts and service module. And you can say before a certain date, so before the 11th, update this, and it'll void every ticket that it finds. So, and I ran that for today's date. I should have pushed it for tomorrow, and that way it would have grabbed this one too. But that is just and I think I showed this when we did our service training yesterday, but I just like to reiterate that it is much easier to keep a clean appointments list than it is an open tickets list. And I'm in the efforts of keeping the system easy to use and the records, and the data clean, we want to make sure that you don't end up with 7,000 invoices like this. So let's go ahead into the ticket itself. I'm just going to click new invoice. We'll review the other items here, parts picking, parts requests. We did see a little bit of parts requests in service yesterday, but I don't mind revisiting it. But for those of you that were in yesterday's session, this should look fairly familiar. In fact, the invoice is the exact same, except there's no middle section for labor, for job lines, for sublet work, for tech time, etc. It's just the parts lines and the header. So let's work down each field. If there are any questions, as always, feel free to pose them in the Q&A section. But let's get started. So you can see here my document number hasn't saved. Well, the system's trying to be smart here in that if I didn't add a customer and I don't add any parts, since there's no save button in parts and service, which I don't know if you guys noticed yesterday, but there is not, the system auto saves for you every keystroke. So if I plug something in here, it has saved. Well, it hasn't saved anything yet because I have no customer and no parts, $0 invoice. If I get out of this ticket, you'll see it didn't create a new one. Let me make sure I'm correct in stating that. It did still create one. So it does save that document number after you leave the ticket, right? That's the first kind of saving of that. So now if I go back into it, now it has a document number assigned, even though I don't have anything on it. So again, just notice that if you ever see that document number showing not saved, it's just because you haven't closed out and gone back into the ticket. Once you do, it will populate for you. From here, we're going to do that same thing, add my customer record. I think we talked about it yesterday. If you add someone who's never been in here before, you can always add entities on the fly. I'm just going to grab one of our existing ones to make it easy. So we know our company location. If this does not look to be your company location, double check which module you have open. Again, the quickest way to find out which company location you have open is in the top. So I have Parts and Service Company 1 open, and that is Profit Center A, Company 1. Both are correct values for this location. I know I'm not in B or C, so I won't have to recreate this ticket if I misclicked. So now we have the status. Like we talked about, these statuses are very important in following your pipeline from start to finish. Just like in the deal desking module, I would encourage having an efficient status listing here and not trying to overdo it with 20 or 30 statuses. These could be modified in the Edit, Modify Statuses, Parts and Service Statuses window. And again, the colors matter, the name matters, the order that you put them in the list view matters. Make it logical, from estimate all the way to cashed out. How many different things would we want to try to notate what's going on within a ticket? So that's up to you. You guys can keep the statuses that the system comes with and try to run with that. I do have dealerships who have not made a single change to that status list, and it seems to operate okay for them. But I would still believe that there are some certain parameters that would help you all, like a special order parts, received, not received, waiting for, or, a big one here. And I think this is something we hadn't really talked about yet, but I hope to instill this in everybody here. If we change a status on an invoice, right? If I move this from open to waiting for parts, the system can generate automatic emails to go out, both internally and externally. I have some dealerships who, when their parts arrive on a parts special order, then it can email the customer letting them know their parts have arrived. So that's getting a bit complex with it, and down the road you could get that set up similarly. But in reality, the best thing is an internal flag or notification of what's going on. Here's an example. I have dealerships that create a need info status. And when they pick that status, the system emails automatically the advisor on the ticket, which is down here at the bottom, so the parts advisor. It can email maybe our GM and just generate that conversation, right? Sometimes the only thing that a status change might need to do is notify someone or help initiate a conversation, in real life. So start thinking about ways that, if a certain status gets hit or, something that you guys need to track that doesn't get tracked today or you have trouble tracking today, think about some internal notifications that you can create for yourselves and that can, be part of your process. That works for parts and service statuses. It works for parts POs and receiving tickets. Again, this is a bit more of an advanced functionality, and you'll probably get more familiar with it as you use the system over time. And we can set these up at any time. But the reason I mention this now is, consider that when you're creating your statuses, because a needs info status could be valuable to you. And the reason I've opened up our CRM is this is where we set up what they're called event notifications. So if I go in here and say add modify event notifications, let's just create one real quick. I'm going to add a new one. We're going to call this need info. Okay, so which system are we doing this on? Maybe we're doing it in finance. Is this for one company or all? All companies. So let's say a deal moves from any status at all, so leave that field blank, and it moves into approved for finance. Well, maybe we need more info. We need to collect customers X, Y, Z, whatever the case may be. I can go ahead and generate that email. Now, the email may seem unimportant, but if you notice, we have insert merge fields, which means we can add in things like the buyer's information, their name, the selling price of the unit they're purchasing, the deposit, the date they took their deposit, the gross of the deal, the make and model of the unit they're selling. There's a lot of field data here that you can apply, whether it's a trade coming in, needing more info on in the finance department, needing info on parts that should be ordered but they're delayed. There's a lot of things that can start generating internally and hopefully help you all navigating the system. So definitely consider that when you're doing your status listing. Customer PO number. This is something that we talked about yesterday in service. If a customer does have an order specific to their invoice, right? We've special ordered it for this customer. You can put that PO number here as a reference. It doesn't link the two invoices really in any way, but what it does do is if I ever go to search my invoicing, you can search by customer PO number. So you can if you don't remember the ticket number and the customer's name, but the PO's here and you see the parts and you have the PO number, you could reference that here and find that. The ticket type is how we're billing for this item. These are customizable. So if you wanted to add to this list or to the defaults that show up there, you can do so. By default, I'd say the most popular is obviously parts retail. This will charge a customer and expect payment on a cash out screen. But we also have items like parts internal. Just like an internal ticket on the service side, the system's not going to ask for money, but what it is going to do is send this balance, the net total of the ticket, to a unit of your choosing. If you don't pick a stock number, it won't let you cash out, just like a service ticket invoice. So again, if we're doing work on the lot and I'm installing some mats that don't require any labor, I could do a parts ticket to show that internal work being done. But parts internal isn't very frequently used because typically any sort of augmentation of the units on your lot usually would require labor, and that is better served through a service ticket. So just keep in mind, you've got a couple options here. Some folks do web sales, so they like to code the ticket as web sales. That way they can differentiate between all of the retail sales they've done throughout the year versus their online sales and do comparisons. So just keep that in mind. If there isn't something in this list that you need, let our team know and we can add it, or we can teach you how to add to this list. But usually you don't, frequently add ticket types. It's usually you get them all set in there and then you're good to go. Cash out date cannot be populated by hand. It is only populated when you hit cash out here and finalize the cash out process. So that is a good safeguard so that people can't say something cashed out before or after it actually did. It always stamps out on the day it was collected. Keep in mind, if someone cashes something out late, like a customer took their parts and made payment 2 weeks ago, so the value of that ticket really should be landing in our October numbers for accounting. But if we didn't cash it out until today, the system's going to have to force it to today, and we would have to get the accounting team to backdate that transaction into the month that it should have gone into. So keep in mind, there are a lot of things in the system that you can kind of do late or after the fact. Cashing out is not one of them. So this is the same for your end of day reports, and it's just that the timing of your cash out is pretty important. And if it's not done correctly, you'll definitely have to get with your accounting team. I do have a question that popped up from Airstream of Scottsdale. Question is, can a ticket type be created to bill out to an internal GL account that is not tied to a specific unit, such as a casualty loss or policy or maintenance? Absolutely. I do believe that parts policy charge should be a default in this list. And you have full control over the available policy charge accounts. So whether it's a casualty loss account, policy, or maintenance accounts, yes, you could point that to that account. So when you pick that item type, down here at the bottom, you select the GL that it bills to. So yes, you can do that. Here's another kind of creative way that I've seen this done. I'm not as big a fan of it, but it does work. You could charge parts internal, right? Not the policy or anything, but we have folks create a fake unit in the system, like a stock number 999, not a real unit, but it's a fictitious unit. And the GL accounts assigned to that unit are typically things like shop supplies cost or shop labor, so that you can bill a monthly shop ticket from service against that unit. But in reality, it's not hitting unit values, it's hitting the GLs that like parts and service GLs for shop maintenance. It's a creative way of doing it. I like your idea on the just policying out, because you have full control over which items are in this policy charge list. So you could set up GL accounts, even if they're not expenses, to use here. So, that might be the best option. Or we create another ticket type called parts casualty loss, and we point that to specific GLs. If you're curious about how the accounting works on this, just so you know, it's all going to be able to be handled. Every sale in the system has this table, and every item type we add to this table, I have full control over where it goes. So short answer, yes, you can create that to do that internal billing without needing a unit. You just kind of have to work with us in the beginning to let us know how you want that set up. I hope that answers your question. So again, yeah, sit down, just like your statuses, you'll probably want to sit down, probably parts and service teams, and discuss, what are all the different item types we could potentially need to bill out. And then, of course, make sure that those lists match for both parts and service, so you all have the same kind of access. The department here doesn't typically need to be filled in, because the way the system's designed, if you don't fill it in, the system knows that it's coming from a parts ticket. So it's going to default the parts department here. The purpose for having a department here isn't so that you have to remember to put parts in here all the time. You can always just leave it blank. But if truly the revenue and the cost of this ticket should go to a different department, say sales, you can do that here. So now, if sales upcharged a part, and for whatever reason they weren't putting that on the deal, you could go in here and code the ticket to new sales department, and now all of the revenue and the costs will show up on the sales P&L, not the parts P&L. That is if you would want to reroute where the items are going. Otherwise, leave it blank. It's going to credit the parts department. We talked about customer waiting. That's just simply a checkbox, yes or no, in this listing view, just to let you know, is there a customer in the building? That's not always how I see it used, but that's usually the most frequent that I've seen to identify that someone is still in the shop waiting to take their vehicle home. We talked about apply internal yesterday on service. What does that do? It stamps your dealership customer here. So if I hit apply internal, it's putting motility up at the top. And it's also changing my ticket type for me to parts internal. So it's faster than searching this entity up and then manually changing this to parts internal. Well, what if I accidentally hit apply internal? Oops, sorry for moving the mouse. If I accidentally clicked it, well, just change the entity on it. Let's put this back to Mr. Greer, and let's change this back to parts retail. No harm, no foul. So pretty much the same thing. If I had searched that entity up manually and typed it in, this is just faster to hit. The dates up here at the top, again, if we're working with our service department and trying to accurately date what's going on here, these dates can help you. Like, when is it promised? Well, I ordered the part today and tracking says it should be here on Thursday. So hopefully end of day by Thursday, you can get it. A delivery date can be used if you do any drop shipping, which is what this DS box is for, which we'll go over here in a moment. So again, the dates are up to you to attend to. They will default to the day that we create the ticket, but it's up to your team to move them beyond that if there is any reason to be doing so. Let's get to the actual line items. Okay, if you know your part number, it's very simple. Type it in, hit tab. If it finds multiple records, it'll let you know. This part has an invoice reminder. Also, remember we talked about earlier event notifications, messaging, making it to other team members. That's what this reminder on this part is for. So for this flexible hose, we probably pay a surplus in freight. So someone put a ticket reminder that every time I add this part, I have to bill freight. And if I try to click away from this or off of it, I can't, right? I can't skip this. I have to acknowledge it and hit OK. So you may ask, well, how do I bill out freight? Well, our system creates freight and other ticket items with a part number. Some people like this, some people hate it. I think it's fairly simple. And here's another invoice reminder warning me, don't use this part, use part number FR instead. Okay, so maybe we put in the wrong one, so let's try this. Highlight the part, hit the delete key to remove it, and then let's try FR for freight. Someone's put an invoice reminder on both, sending them back and forth. So again, not all notifications are good, especially if they're out of date. This one's from way back in 2018, so I'm going to remove that invoice reminder. Delete the part one more time and look at what it normally looks like. So when you bill out freight, this is similar to shop supplies and other kind of oddities that we can build to our customers. The system's going to prompt you and say, do we want it to prompt for cost? Well, you probably don't know at the ticket level what the cost is on the freight. So typically we just zero it out, right? The cost of the freight was handled when we bought the part. If I bought a $10 part and the freight was $5, when we receive that part into the inventory system, that $5 of freight is going directly to our cost account or a freight expense if we so choose. Then when we turn around and sell freight, because a customer needs to pay for that overnight freight charge that we collected or incurred, well now, as long as I bill out over $5, I've made money on that freight transaction. So this flexible hose, Mr. Greer is buying 5 of them, putting them at $50. We'll go ahead and sell that many, relieve that many, and there we go. I have $250 of part sales, $10 of freight that's itemized out, any sales tax if possible, and then of course our net total. So with that freight being billed out, you can see, there's room for error, but usually it's pretty straightforward if you put those invoice reminders on to remind your staff that if you have a high value dollar item or part that you're selling, and we really want to make sure that freight is recouped there, put that invoice reminder on it. This would also be appropriate if this was a drop ship, right? To drop ship an item to a customer, we need to charge the additional freight it took to get that item delivered directly to them. If that's the case, you definitely want to bill out freight. Go ahead and remove that part for the moment, and let's continue down the list. Maybe there's a part I don't know the name of. Or I'm sorry, I don't know the part number of, but I know the name. So if I type in hitch into this description field and hit tab, the system's going to search up every hitch that we have in the system, whether there's quantities or not. So I can sort by total on hand, find things that are not in the negative. There's a hitch, $200. We'll go ahead and add it. Pretty easy. You can also search parts by hitting the search parts down at the bottom, but I like the description search. It's fairly quick. You have a company number here. That should always match the company number on the invoice. You also have your sold and relieved columns. We talked about this. This is your allocation line. This is your relieved line. And you can always track what's going on with that part by highlighting it and seeing here. So we had one on hand, one allocated, and total available 0. Well, the allocation isn't here because if you notice, if I zero this out, this hitch is going back to 2 on hand. So there's an allocation on another ticket elsewhere, and I have 1 available. So as soon as I relieve this to 0, you'll see that availability drops to 0. I no longer have any available for other tickets. The DIFF column is a difference column. So if I had a difference between what was sold and what was relieved, this is just an easy way to see what's still missing on the ticket. LS is lost sale. I will say that this functionality gets ignored quite a bit, but I will tell you that it's pretty powerful because it does factor into the algorithm for suggested reorder. We haven't talked yet about suggested reorder too much, but we will when we go to master inventory as well as the parts ordering and receiving trainings. But the lost sale is to record, I went to sell 5 of these to Mr. Greer, but we only had 3. So now I could track what did we lose a sale on by typing 2, and it's going to ask why. It could be pricing discrepancy between one store and the next. It was too expensive here, or maybe quantity not on hand. So we didn't have enough to fulfill his order. Well, there's a lost sales report that you can run throughout the year that shows you all of the parts that you lost the sale on, and you can see based on the comments, was it a quantity issue? Was it a pricing issue? Was it an employee issue? You know, the guy got into an argument with our staff, and, you know, maybe we need to capture that. So again, using that LS is to your advantage, because if I go to the parts and I go to their trends tab, if we set the system to suggested reorder for this part, the system's going to try to reorder these parts, you know, or put them onto your order list for you based on trend. How many you sold month over month, how many you ordered month over month, and how many lost sales you have. If you plug those lost sales in, and, you know, that algorithm shows that, you know, you sold 5 in July that year, but you lost 6 more, well, it's probably going to try to get you to a quantity of around 11 the next month that comes around, to make sure that that does, you know, you can fulfill at that time. So that LS is to your advantage to use. I do frequently not see it being used, so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, the DS is a drop ship box. So if I mark this as a drop ship part, the system knows not to pull it from inventory. It knows that this part does not exist. What it does mean is we're going to create a purchase order to create a, you know, an order for that part, but then the drop ship address, it's going to ship to our customer's billing or, you know, their home address. So you can pick a different shipping address or their home address here, so that when we cash this ticket out and we go create the purchase order, you know, the vendor will know to send that part to this customer's information, not to the dealership. So we'll cover that a bit more in parts ordering and receiving, but just good to know that that marks an item as drop ship. If this is an internal ticket, you'll see vehicle. You'll also see vehicle when we pull a customer record. I guess in the past, folks have asked for, well, hey, I've got 6 parts on a parts invoice, but my customer doesn't know which parts are for the hitch, which parts are for the trailer itself, and which parts are for his truck. So using this vehicle, you can actually show, you know, okay, this part is for your Ford F-150. I'm sorry, I have this backwards. This hitch is for your Ford F-150. The flexible hose is for your Corvette. So again, just a way to help show your customers, you know, which parts go where, because that can print out on their customer copy. Price is pretty straightforward. It's coming from master inventory, right? So if I hit info here, there's my price. Let's see if that matches. I know I upcharged this to $50, so that's why I'm getting this little red box. It's telling me that my price is different than it normally would be. Now I've updated that to $17.99, and you'll see that went away because, hey, now we're matching. I have an average cost of $10 and $17.99 for the price. If this was a core item, you know, a core part like a battery or something where you're retrieving the core, you know, in efforts to collect that core charge, you can place that core charge dollar amount against each part. So when they get returned, it will, you know, request the core, and if the customer says no, they do not have it, it will upcharge them by the core amount. And then we do have a full core maintenance section over here in the left where you can handle parts returns, core returns back to the manufacturers. Discount is a flat discount here, so I can type in $5, flat discount that line. If I want to discount the ticket as a whole, as a percentage, you can come down here and hit discount, type in 10%, or I guess 40%, there's a big discount, and it'll apply that for you. If I want to zero that back out, hit the discount again, leave it at $0%, and hit OK. The totals are just the sum of your price multiplied by your quantity relieved or quantity sold. And then the calculation here is telling you how the part is getting that pricing. This one, for example, is marking up 10% above cost. This one is 90% of its list price. And remember, like we had talked about maybe briefly, is every customer can be pre-defaulted a certain calculation type. I'll show you an example. Let's say Mr. Greer is a frequent purchaser from us, and we want to throw him a bit of a discount each time he comes in. Well, on his parts and service info tab, there's a parts price category, and that means that he's getting a discount because he's getting C pricing. What does C mean? If we go to the parts, you'll see the pricing matrix table. If I had a customer in pricing A category, they're going to get 100% of the list price, $17.99. B is going to get 90L, and C is going to get 10% above our cost, which is 0. So it actually looks like our cost method is set to replacement cost, not average in my demo system here. So as you see, I update my replacement cost. Now it is giving me an $11 price on my part. Unfortunately, things don't retroactively change, right? We don't want to change pricing that has already been quoted to a customer. So it still shows this 10C here, but watch what happens if I delete that part off, add it back in, and then again, sell 3 of them, relieve 3. Now I have an $11 price, and you can see the calculation is applying. So you can always customize your customer's pricing levels based on that parts and service info tab. And again, that's add modify entity, parts and service info, and then their category. And just good to know here, every customer defaults to pricing type A. So that is always the first kind of, if you don't attend to this, it'll always be A. You can also set up your exemptions here too, like parts and labor exemption from sales tax, you know, what type of customer they are. So sometimes you may want to attend to this as a parts and service employee so that you can make sure that each time they return, they get the appropriate overrides and the parts pricing that you promised them. Some of the other items here, you have some little boxes. I know they're empty right now, but they will show things like upsell. So any part that was sold with this part in the last X amount of days can show as an upsell opportunity. And if this part has been superseded or there's a substitute part, you can also click on that button and it will prompt for those. Let me see if I can find a part with that. I don't know if I can off the top of my head. Yeah, not lucking out today. So you will find those there, and all you have to do is click on it, and it will recommend the upsell opportunities or the substitute / superseded parts, you know, that you can apply instead of this flexible hose. The bin location is where the item is being relieved from. So if you have multiple bins, it's always going to pull from the preferred bin, but you can always change that here and say, okay, I want this coming out of bin A2 instead of the default bin A1. So always available to change that if there are bins assigned to that part. The employee button or the E button, this is for credit. So each ticket you can assign who the quote unquote salesperson is. And we have reports that track what the margins are, what the average profit is for each of your parts employees. And you can use this for incentive-based bonuses, right? You know, if you sell $50,000 worth of parts this month, you get X. Well, you can track all of that by making sure that when I key in my ticket, you know, it's going to default the person who's keying in the ticket, but you'll want to make sure that if you're, you know, somebody else is doing this for you, like your parts manager, but technically you, the sales parts employee, should be getting credit for, you'll want to make sure that your name is there. The G button or the Google button is going to Google the description for you, which unfortunately, unless the description is super specific, sometimes this price matching doesn't really help you, but just good to know that you can quickly do a price match there if you so choose. And again, hitch is very vague, so if I Google hitch, I'm not going to get the pricing that I need, because now I still have to go through what type of hitch, what's the custom, what's the size, the weight, its tow capacity. So it's, it's a little vague here if the description is not, to your advantage. And then of course you see me hitting info over here. That's just taking me to the master record of the part in inventory. And again, we will be covering this afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern. So you should be pretty familiar with the ticket. If you want to zero parts out or delete them, you can just highlight them, hit the delete key to remove them. I'll leave these on here for the moment because I'd like to go through some of the items at the bottom. So remember earlier in the discussion today, we talked about the difference between closing and cashing out. Well, hitting cash out, of course, is going to initiate our cash out process. But if I hit close, what am I doing? It's asking me to close the ticket. Well, you guessed it. It's going to be in my closed, not cashed out listing, but we still have not collected payment. So you could see it'd be very easy to forget about a ticket here because I said, oh, it's done. We just have to wait for him to come back. Well, if I don't have a way to, to reach back out to Mr. Greer and get him back in the shop, how do we collect this $224? So again, it's, unless someone's actively auditing this closed, not cashed out screen, it's not, I'd rather leave it as an open ticket because to me, that's going to jump out at you faster, because if I'm keeping this list clean and I see tickets created from 6 months ago and they're still here, that's a problem. So again, just trying to simplify how these things can land, in certain places and to prevent it from, falling through the cracks and getting missed. You can also close a ticket by changing the status manually to closed. And to reopen a ticket, if you just saw, I just changed the status back to open. Now I can do this freely, but once you cash a ticket out, you cannot change the status. It is locked in, it's cashed out, it's done. Any adjustments would need to be made by the accounting departments. Okay. Order parts. So if I were ordering parts specific to this customer, you could do so from directly within this invoice. I could either right click on the part and hit place on order, or I could hit order parts and the system will tell me based on the quantities and my min maxes if there are any items that need to be ordered. We'll cover this later in the parts ordering and receiving trainings, that webinar, and that's going to be today at 3 p.m. So we do have the master inventory from 1 to 2, and then parts ordering and receiving from 3 to 4. Okay. Apply return. I will tell you if you're creating a return ticket, here's how it works. Let's say a customer is returning items on ticket number 124293. Just create a new receiver. A new parts ticket. Hit apply return, and you can either scan the invoice. So if the customer returns with their customer copy, there'll be a barcode up at the top right. You can scan that barcode and it'll pull up this ticket directly. Or you can just type it in manually, 293. And what it'll do is it's going to add every part back to that ticket, but in a negative quantity, and it's going to prompt me for what we want to do. Am I restocking it? Are we returning it for a replacement? Are we returning it for a credit? No credit? Are we discarding it? Any comments or authorization passwords or authorization employee numbers? That's fine. There's the part with the serial number that we have to validate. So again, this process is pretty straightforward. You just mark OK for each part. Let's say all these items he's bought, he's only returning one. Find the one he's returning, this chalk wheel, and just delete everything else. Now I can cash out the invoice at a negative dollar amount. So if I go ahead and hit cash out, balance is less than 0, I must return payment. The system will tell you what the original invoice was cashed out at, but that's not really important here since we're not returning the whole ticket. Why don't we just go ahead and refund the $6.26 back to his Visa card? So we'll do that by hitting Visa. It's a negative amount. When I prompt my payment terminal, it will go ahead and credit him the $6.26. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this back out, just so we can return back to our first example. But just wanted to show you the return process is much easier than folks seem to make it out to be. I could also manually do a return by adding a part number, 123 here, and then just typing a negative quantity, -1 sold. It's going to do the same thing. We'll go through further in depth in a later part session about how to create the purchase order back to the vendor, but for customer returns at the at the invoice level, you're pretty familiar with that now. It's just a negative sold, negative relieved quantity. Let's say you're not putting it back into inventory. Leave the relieved at 0 and the sold back to -1. You can still track that part's return as it makes its way back to the manufacturer because we're not restocking it back into inventory. We talked about the discount. We talked about the search parts. The price list here is a shortcut to your price books. So if you want to confirm pricing from, let's say, NTP's price book, I can reference it here, search up my part number. Oops, type that in right. There it is. Okay, here's the pricing for it. If I don't have it in inventory and we need to order it, we'll go through price books probably more in the next service section, but just good to know that if you have price books today from your various vendors, usually they send those in a CSV format. You can provide those to us, or we can teach you how to upload them quarterly. That way you can always have the most up-to-date pricing available to you on your parts inventory. Core maintenance we'll probably go through in our parts ordering and receiving training. Probably no need there until we get to there. Deposit we did take yesterday. Again, just for those of you who might not have been on that session, if I click the deposit button, add in 10 bucks, just lock these parts in, hit cash out, take my cash payment of $10, email my receipt. I've now taken a $10 payment down on this invoice. When the ticket cashes out on the accounting side, it will reverse that deposit receivable balance back to 0, showing that the dealership doesn't owe that customer anything. Get out of my, I'm not going to send the email receipt. Adding a note for those of you who didn't see yesterday, notes are probably your biggest advantages to this software. It's visibility across of your departments. It's, just capturing anything that might be relevant for this sale or for this customer, or even the parts sold if there was issues with them. So again, notate everything you can. That way you have visibility both on the customer record and within the invoice. You have the options to print multiple different ticket copies. You can always print to screen first or email it directly to a customer. You even have the option to e-sign or have them sign a PDF through Adobe Sign. If you're interested in that, that is a paid add-on that you can augment the system with that we can always show as a separate demo if you reach out to your sales representative. The last item on here, of course, the other namesake of this training this morning was parts kits. So we've seen pretty much the bulk of a parts ticket, but what's a parts kit? Well, you saw canned jobs the other day in service. So if I click parts kit, and let's say we sell an oil change kit. So I double click on oil change kit. Well, it's just going to add those parts in the quantities that we've specified at the pricing we've specified automatically. No need to remember our part numbers, remember how many are relieved for each. Very simple. You can remove a parts kit by just simply deleting the parts. We're back to where we were, of course, with our $10 deposit. How do you create parts kits? Edit, modify, parts kits down here at the bottom. And if I hit new to create a new one, take a look at what it looks like. It looks just like a, parts ticket. So if I call this test parts kit and I add part number 123, okay, maybe because we bundle this with another part A here, this air filter and this flexible hose, because I don't want to, we're going to offer a discount in pricing. So instead, we'll say that this is actually 15 bucks here. This is 27 bucks here, or 26. So we have a $7 savings because the customer buys these two things bundled as one of our kits. It's that easy. So now within an invoice, I can type in parts kit, find all of them, or type. I don't usually type in the description first. I just search up everything, find my test parts kit. There's my invoice line receiver or reminder. And now it's added those parts in the dollar amounts and the pricing that we would expect. So not a lot of time needing to be spent on parts kits. As you can see, they're very straightforward. You're just creating templates for the things you sell over and over and over again that you don't want to have to keep typing out over time. We've pretty much hit our deadline here, so I do want to try to leave a few more minutes for questions, so feel free to start posing those. The last thing I do want to talk about that I did talk about in our finance session the other day is deposits. Let's say this customer backs out and he doesn't buy any of those parts. Well, what happens if I just go ahead and void this ticket? We're going to still show that we owe Mr. Greer $10, right? He put $10 down on this invoice and we never finalized the ticket. So there's going to be a negative accounts receivable, technically an accounts payable, back to Mr. Greer for $10. So how do we clear that from the accounting team? Before you void anything out that has a deposit on it, you will want to take the deposit again as a negative and cash it out. So we're going to return Mr. Greer's $10 to him, email our receipt, and then now when we go back into service, let me get out of my message here. You'll see my ticket's back to a $0 value. And now I can comfortably void and say that Mr. Greer decided on buying these parts. Okay, so always try to make sure you zero your deposits out. Otherwise, the accounting team is going to have a customer refund check that they're going to need to create to true up Mr. Greer's balance to zero. That is all I have for you on parts invoicing. We'll probably cover more in-depth parts picking and parts requests back on service training because, again, those both are service functionalities there. But you should have a pretty good understanding of invoicing with parts, using the list view, creating your parts kits, and pretty much every field within the parts invoice we went over. So some of those things you will ignore and not need to use day to day. Others, like the lost sale, I would advise using. It will make sense over time, and eventually that data will be helpful for your parts team when they reorder or letting the system designate orders for them. So thank you all for your time. I will leave a few more minutes for questions if I see anything pop in. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your morning, and we will talk to you today at 1 p.m. Eastern, covering the master inventory module. All right, everyone, it doesn't look like any questions are flowing through. So digest some of that information. Hopefully it all made sense to you, and we'll catch you this afternoon on our next session. Thank you, everybody, for your time.